We are now officially live on air with our special guest. We have Professor Rob Gaunt out in the USA. We also have a mystery guest that has joined us, and that is Nathan Coleman. And we also have one of their team members. Is it Suresh? Is that correct?
Yes.
And Suresh is one of their media people. And then, of course, we have Maria from Argentina, and we have Sebastian from Kerala in India. And, of course, we have our live viewers who are going to be watching this, and hopefully we might have some more people join us during the session. So basically, we're talking about a situation where Nathan, and this happens to other people too, Nathan is paralyzed from the neck downwards with some mobility in his hands, if I understand correctly, and
arms, but not really hands.
Not hands, just your, parts of your hands that you can.
Some wrist. Wrist is off, no fingers.
Okay, and effectively, you've had an operation where they've planted some sort of mechanical or electrical device into your brain, and you are now able to control a prosthetic or a robotic arm using thought. Is that correct?
Yes.
It might be oversimplifying a little bit, but obviously it's a bit more complicated than that. So before we get into the details of Nathan's story and how we got to all of this, Rob, I'm obviously a big science fiction fan. I love watching science fiction movies. I know that Nathan's an anime fan, and we'll talk about that afterwards as well. But what I find amazing is that this is not the first time that it's happened, that people have put a chip in someone else's brain to get them to control a robot. Could you give us a little bit of a brief history in terms of the development of this particular field in medicine and science?
Sure. So it's really a long story in many ways, and you can go back, as far as you want to, really, in terms of people understanding what the brain actually does. But maybe the best place to start the story is when people are thinking about the different parts of the brain, particularly those parts of the brain that actually control movement. And so, this is really not my area of expertise at all, but I can summarize it fairly quickly. And it turns out that there's a particular spot in your brain, it's called the motor cortex. And this is a part of your brain that becomes highly active when you move, right? And it's a part of the brain that if there is damage to this part of the brain, you become paralyzed. So people who have a stroke in the motor cortex have great difficulty moving. And for a lot of years, people have been really interested in understanding what exactly it is that the motor cortex does. We don't actually know the answer to that yet in many ways, although we know enough about what's going on for Nathan to be able to control the arm. And I can describe briefly what that means. But about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer than that now, 12 years ago, the first person was implanted with a device that could actually listen to the activity of individual neurons in the brain. And so this type of work had been going on in animals for decades before. It's sort of the core of brain science, really, in a lot of ways. But about 12 years ago, the first person was implanted. And to date, I don't have exact numbers, but there's maybe about somewhere between 8 and 10 people that have been implanted with these types of devices for at least a period of time. Nathan is the second person that we've worked with who's sort of been a partner in our research here at the University of Pittsburgh. A number of years ago, some colleagues of mine worked with the lady Jan Sherman, who had similar devices implanted in these motor parts of her brain that control movement. What was new and has been done for the first time with Nathan, of course, is these implants in another part of the brain that involve processing sensory information. So when you touch your fingers, there's a part of the brain, right beside it that lights up and becomes active. And so Nathan also has these devices implanted in this sensory component of the brain. And so when we actually electrically stimulate that, we send in tiny little pulses of electricity to that part of the brain. And when we do that, Nathan experiences sensations that he feels like come from his own hand. So this type of work has been going on for maybe about 12 years, but this is the first time, Nathan, that this ability to provide sensations or actually sort of write information into the brain has been done.
So take me to that moment when you switched it on for the first time to test to see if Nathan was going to sense or be able to feel something that was tactile using the robotic arm.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was maybe more dramatic than it ended up actually being. And the quick story really is that because of the way we designed the study, we work closely with the FDA here to allow us to do all of this stuff, and so we really had to just turn up the knobs very slowly and very carefully. So it was actually maybe about 3 weeks after we started that Nathan felt the first thing, and I don't know, Nathan, you'd be better to comment on it than I would.
So yeah, I've said a couple times it was really amazing at first, like the first time, and then now it's just second nature. Like every time I'm testing, and I felt it, I don't know, 1,000,000 times since then. So it was very cool.
Yeah,
kind of cool.
Do you ever think that
it's still cool.
If this is what you were able to feel now, then what is the next step? I mean, does it excite you that was just with the hands? What about the feet? What about the rest of the body?
I mean, in theory, it could work for anywhere you could put the electrodes, right, Rob? Basically.
Yeah, there's practical challenges, but and in fact, one of the, I've got a hat here. It's my brain hat that I wear sometimes. My dad actually showed to me this at Christmas. He'd seen this on some store mannequin somewhere. But the what's cool about the brain, or these sensory parts of the brain, is this this blue part here actually contains like a map of your body. And so out here is where sort of the face, lips, and eyes are, and then you go into the thumb, and then you go index finger, middle index, ring finger, then you go up into the wrist and palm and arms, and you go up to the trunk. But right when you get up to the top here, this is kind of maybe around where the sort of the abdomen or the waist would be. And actually, to get to the legs and feet, you'd have to sort of peel the brain apart like that and go in on the edge like that. Wow. to get to the legs and feet. So that would be a practical challenge of getting to the legs and feet with at least with the type of electrodes that we currently use. But getting to any part of the arm and sort of trunk would be relatively straightforward.
Sure. So that's, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean that's very exciting from a medical point of view. I mean, it just means that if you've managed, and 10 years is not a long time at all.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you start talking in the next 20 years, the next 2 decades, the kind of progress that might be expected, we could be expecting to see some jaw-dropping things.
Yeah, I think so. One of the real challenges has been just the number of electrodes. Right? How many can you stick in? There's 10 billion neurons or something in the brain. There's millions, probably hundreds of millions of neurons in this part of the motor cortex and sensory cortex, and we have about 250 electrodes in.
Wow!
Right.
So that's so limited.
Yeah, so we're accessing this just almost an immeasurably small part of the brain, and yet even with that little bit, Nathan is able to move the arm around and can feel things from the hand. There's groups right now that are funding research to try and take these devices from having 100 or 200 electrodes like we have, and trying to build million channel systems. It is very early days in that work, but those are the types of things people are starting to think about how to do.
Sure. So I'm going to go back to Nathan and just a very brief history. You were obviously studying science at university, and then life changed. Can you give us a little bit of a quick run through history, and then I want to know what would put you in a position where you would want to obviously have someone open up your head and put some hardware inside.
I mean, why wouldn't you?
Exactly.
That is usually my answer. But I guess I'll start at the beginning. So in 2004, I started going to Penn State for a nanofabrication program they had. And 2 months in, I wrecked my car and broke my neck. So that's how I became quadriplegic. In rehab, they asked me, there's a research registry that, Pittsburgh is hospitals on top of hospitals and research. And so one of the first things they did was asked if I wanted to go on this research registry. And they said, if a doctor is looking for, someone with your kind of situation going on, they'll give you a call. And so I'd done a couple really small studies, and years later, probably, it's been probably about 8 or 9 years after my accident, I got a call from this group for the part that Jan did before me, the part without any sensory stuff. And I actually didn't qualify because I had wrist flexion, so I could move my wrist up.
Mm-hmm.
And in their protocols, that was listed as significant hand function. And so one of the things they were worried about, was the loss of function someone would have, during surgery. Something could happen, I guess.
So there was a risk to you.
Yeah. But I mean, moving your wrist up is not that significant. And so I didn't qualify the first time, which is actually turned out to be a good thing. But so then I was doing a MEG study with another person that's kind of in their group or office, whatever Stephen was. But so in the process of doing that study, they were like, hey, would you want to do this? And I said, absolutely, because I wanted to do it 2 years ago. And they told me that they were in the process of changing the protocols. So wrist movement was no longer significant hand function. And we went from there.
And they
as
tell
to
you
why.
Yeah.
The why is really why wouldn't I? I usually say someone had to. And there's already I don't know actual numbers, but a very small subset of people that could actually do this, that would actually qualify. And then I was one of them. So I thought, why would I not do it?
But I mean, this is groundbreaking stuff. I mean, it really is so exciting that you are willing to. And I'm not saying you're giving your body over to science. I mean, you really are a pioneer in this particular sensory field, which is new to what all the others, your predecessors, have been doing. Do they get a little bit of robotic arm envy? Do they get upset about when you have meetings and get together? They're like, you must be teacher's pet. You got the sensory one. We just got the old little one that that we can tell our finger what to do, but it doesn't tell us anything back. I mean, do you have those sort of discussions?
There's never been any open jealousy that I know of. Jan, the lady who did it before me, I actually found out that I was going into surgery on a Monday, and I had posted on Friday, because a lot of people didn't even know I had decided to do it. Then I found out that Friday night on Facebook that I'd been friends with her daughter for like 2 years and never even knew that
You did.
that was who she was. And
That is so funny. Well, it's a
she's
small
the only
world.
other. She's the only other, person that's done something like this that I've actually talked to. So I don't know. Everyone else out there might be jealous. And then, when I'm done and someone else has got the new cool stuff, I'll probably be a little jealous too.
Just a little. So now, Robert, coming back to you, we've all seen The Matrix. We all saw that you put a USB drive into the guy's head and uploaded information. And now I'm seeing, that you guys are pretty much connecting wires to Nathan's head. First of all, why not Wi-Fi and Bluetooth? Yeah. Are you saying that it might have effects on the brain? And I mean, second of all, are you worried that people might be able to hack the Bluetooth and that could cause a problem? And are we moving towards the Matrix?
Yeah, well, let's leave that last one for a little bit later.
Okay.
But the first ones, so the first question, why not Wi-Fi? Boy, I would love that. I would love to have it because, when we think about doing these research studies, actually the thing we're most concerned about sort of from a clinical risk perspective really is infection. So Nathan has these connectors that come out through the scalp. And, anything, any device that sort of permanently comes to the skin like that is a potential risk, a point for infection. So we're really, really diligent about how we monitor that every day. And, us and other groups, so, we're really careful about it. We've never had any problems. Same with other groups because, we know that this is a challenge. So we'd love to get rid of it. It's a real barrier to actually thinking about doing more of this type of research. So we'd love to get rid of it. The challenge is that the data rates that we currently get out of the devices are, in and around sort of the capacity, the full bandwidth capacity of Wi-Fi, even the highest bandwidth Wi-Fi right now. And so, you can't just take a Wi-Fi router that you buy down at your local electronics store and make it smaller and stick it into a person. They take huge amounts of power, they get hot, and so trying to actually miniaturize that technology has been a dream of people working in this field for 15 years now, but is really not quite materialized. It's getting to the point where there are small external devices, like the size of a box of matches or something that could go on the head and transmit out, but so far putting that kind of capacity in a fully implantable device is just actually not possible. Yet. It'll get there.
I mean, that would be quite amazing because then literally he could walk into a room and just like a magic wand, he could start thinking, move that thing around the table. I mean, it could be a very entertaining party trick.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So he can obviously control a robotic hand by thinking which fingers to move.
Yeah.
And the difference is that you can now wiggle a finger, and while he's blindfolded, he will know which finger you are wiggling.
That's right.
And that's a huge step in terms of where you guys are at the moment.
Yeah, there was a lot of things we didn't really know the answers to before we started. Certainly we hoped and expected this would happen or we wouldn't have tried it in the first place, but we didn't know. And, one of the challenges is that you know, for Nathan, and, you know, if you look at other people who have had amputations or things like that, there's been this question about how much does the brain actually change itself. You know, people with amputations experience these phantom sensations from their missing limbs. There's been descriptions where people, you know, if you touch, you know, sometimes if you touch the face of an amputee, they feel sensations coming from their hands because the brain has changed what it's doing. So it wasn't clear entirely what we would find, but, you know, it turns out that that the organization in the brain, at least for these sensory regions of the brain, seem to be fairly stable. They have not changed very much in the 10 years since Nathan had the accident. And so this map that I described to you that we know it exists in, you know, in your eye has not changed that much in Nathan. And so when we went and put these devices in, we see the same map. And so as we go through and stimulate on different electrodes, going sort of from the middle of the head and moving outwards, we see that same organization or that same map that we know exists in people who have not had an injury.
So let's talk the juicy stuff. Yeah. You take Nathan, you give him, you don't put him to sleep, you keep him awake. Is that correct?
For when we're doing experiments in the lab.
No, when
surgery,
putting a chip in his brain.
Oh, he's asleep.
Oh, is he asleep?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so then the thing is, I've always been told that when they do brain ops, they keep you awake because they need to ensure that where they place things or touch things, they don't want to cause any damage, and they need to know that they're actually, you know, not affecting your speech or your calculations. But now here, you knew exactly where to put that thing. How did you know?
That's right. So Nathan described a little bit. One of the things he said, he'd been involved in this MEG study, MEG. So MEG is something called, it's an acronym for magnetoencephalography. And basically what it is you sit in this, I don't know how you describe it, Nathan, but you sit in like this giant machine, you know, in this little, you stick your head up into this sort of little container with this giant machine sitting over your head. It's kind of like an MRI, but it uses a different type of technology. But what it can do is sort of map out the brain, different parts of the brain as you're doing different things. And so I think, Nathan, you probably, you know, he tried to move his own hand or tried to move his own arm or watched videos of people, you know, touching fingers. And when we do all of that, we can sort of see the different parts of the brain that light up and are responsive. And so with those maps, we went in to place the devices.
That's very interesting. So you obviously did the testing in theory, but it was actually measuring where the electrical activity was taking place.
That's right.
But now that happens when you sit on the screen, but when you actually take the skull and you open it up, how do you know that that's the exact spot? Do you have GPS coordinates that lead you there?
Yeah, actually you do. So one of the things you get so we combine that information from this MEG machine with an MRI. So you can take a picture of the brain with the MRI, and, you know, most operating rooms that are doing brain surgery around the world now, or many of them will have, we have a system called BrainSight, and you actually can sort of make these 3D images of the brain from an MRI machine, you know, and then the surgeon's tools actually have these reflective dots on them. It's like using the same things that you do for motion tracking for making video games or movies or anything like that. They have a version of this thing that works in the operating room, and so the surgeon can be, you know, taking their tool and they can touch a spot on the brain, and they'll be looking at a computer screen and they will see exactly where on this 3D image of the brain that you took pictures from before, exactly where you're touching. And so we have all this information sort of laid out ahead of time, and so we know where we want to go. The surgeon can go in and touch, go hold the probe over different parts of the brain, and we know exactly where it is we want to go.
Now, I'm surprised you guys didn't go the augmented reality route, because there you could have, for example, your goggles, you could see where you're going, but augmented over that could be the overlay of exactly where you need to place the sensors.
I'm sure that'll get there one day. You know, all these types of technologies are regulated by, you know, by the FDA. You know, these things just have to work. Augmented reality is kind of a new thing. I'm sure they will get there, though. That the surgeons will be wearing, you know, VR glasses and just see it. That'd be pretty cool.
I mean, I think Nathan would love to actually have the glasses on while you know, have an extra monitor, so he could actually see you navigating the little canals in and planting the chip in. But now you've got two chips in your brain. The one is the sensory, and one is the motor skill, the motor coordination. Is that correct?
It's four, actually.
Four. So two control sensory and two control motor.
Yeah.
Do they control the right hand or the left hand or both? Because I've only ever seen you using one robotic arm, not two at the same time.
Yeah, so the right I can, you know, do everything with. And then a couple times we have done in a virtual environment a left and a right at the same time.
And
it's weird. It doesn't work. You can't do as much with the left, but I always say brains are dumb. So the part that controls your right arm can also control a left arm if you want it to.
Well,
Rob
I mean, you might not be ambidextrous, but I mean, you could train the brain to do that, couldn't you?
Yeah, I think we could train it to do more of it. So there's, in fact, you know, so the left brain controls the right arm. You know, all these
Correct.
neurons switch over, you know, in your brainstem. And that's most of it. So most of the left brain goes to the right side, but there are some things that actually go down the same side. It's a lot less, but there is some sort of physiology or anatomy that would suggest that you could control both, although, like Nathan describes, you know, not as well. Controlling the left arm with the left brain is a little tougher.
But now, what would happen if you've created a virtual environment so that you don't actually have the prosthetic arm, but when he thinks, the virtual arms move inside this environment, he could potentially become quite the gamer without having to use any of his arms. Or he could become an anime artist without having to use his arms. Potentially.
I go gamer. I've said more than once one of my goals is I want to play Final Fantasy 14 because I saw a YouTube video of some guys using EEG to play World of Warcraft. I'll play a better game with a better system. I mean, I've played Pac-Man. We've done Pac-Man on the computer. That's one of the things.
And you were able to successfully navigate?
Yeah. It goes through the computer to like a keyboard emulator. So it just takes whatever brain signals that the computer would usually forward to the robot. It just sends it to a keyboard emulator instead. So now, games are one of my goals, one of my things I would love to do. But then I also realize that there is real science to do. So
you can have your cake and eat it too. I'm just thinking if you could take a device and control a hand, you could hack that device so that it controls keys on a piano, and you could think different fingers, but they're actually different keys on a piano, and you could create music.
Yeah, that is something we could do. It's actually one of the projects we're working on right now is to try and actually learn how to do a better job of fingers. That's actually kind of tough. Most of the stuff that Nathan will be doing now is, you know, moving the arm around, moving the wrist around, and sort of opening and closing the hand like that. So we do go up to, I think, Nathan, what have we done, up to seven degrees with you?
We've done nine.
So we often talk
That's
about
just nine. The fingers only 9.
So we often talk about things in degrees of freedom of control, and so moving your arm around in space. So this in and out is 1, left and right would be 2, up and down would be 3. Then you can flex and extend the wrist. That'd be 4. Rotating would be 5. Going like this would be 6, and opening and closing the hand would be 7. So we often do that. We can go higher and then start doing 8, or moving independent control to the thumb would be 9. But actually, working on individual fingers is something that we're working on. It's a little less functional. Mostly what we're often thinking about is reaching out, picking up objects, moving them around.
Correct.
But clearly, individual finger function is something we'd like to get to. And you're right. The expectation would be that you could use that to create music if we could get there.
Well, you just need a little bit of creativity, and you could hack so many things. But now I'm curious. You do this experiment where you blindfold Nathan, and then you wiggle a finger on the robotic arm, and then Nathan can tell you with some level of accuracy which finger it is.
That's right.
Is it a high level of accuracy, or is it a pretty good guess?
Well, I mean, Nathan can tell you what it feels like, but basically what we've done is, there's, like I mentioned, there's these maps in the brain, and we've figured out what they look like by stimulating all of the individual electrodes. So we actually have 64 individual electrodes in this sensory part of the brain, and we kind of know what each one does. And so we've made a map between those electrodes and sensors on the hand of the robot, right? And so there's a sensor in the robot that knows when we're touching the index finger, and we sort of connect that up to index finger electrodes in the brain. So I don't know, Nathan, you could comment on how easy or hard that is to do.
I hardly ever miss them.
You hardly ever miss them. I like that.
Yeah. And the ones I'll miss the most will be like the middle and ring. Just because sometimes those electrodes might feel like more like somewhere between both of them, or maybe just a little to the side of one, whereas like the index and pinky, like they're off on the sides. I can always tell those ones, but the other ones I miss sometimes are the middle and the ring.
Do you think that could be the placement of the sensors? That maybe they're a little bit too much in between the two? Or do you think that your brain is still learning to grasp what the sensor's telling you?
It could be both. And it can, some of these things change, day by day. But then since we pick one electrode to match with the sensor, as long as there's one that's pretty close, I can tell them apart.
Now, here's a challenge question for you. I know that if you are blindfolded and Rob wiggles the index finger, you would be able to tell that it is the index finger. And if he wiggles the pinky finger, you'd be able to tell that it's pinky. What would happen if Rob combined 2 or more fingers to create a symbol? So maybe it's something like this. Would you be able to then determine, knowing what fingers you are sensing the move, maybe are you able to piece together what kind of symbol he'd be? I mean, if he did this, for example, as opposed to wiggle the finger, but now if you turned your wrist and did this, would you be able to piece together the sensations and say what the symbol is?
Maybe eventually, but that's not something we've ever tried. So I don't really.
Ooh, new ground. Rob, I'm expecting feedback on this one, because this could be interesting to be able to, and the reason I say this is because on Kickstarter, there was a lovely project where these two young guys got a pair of gloves together, they put sensors in them, and they were doing American Sign Language, and they were using that to translate. And I spoke to my friends here in South Africa who work with the deaf community, and they said, not a good idea in South Africa. And I said, why? Because in South Africa, you have to use your face and your hands when you are speaking. Okay. Whereas in other countries, they can just use the hands, with, independent of the face, and you can, communicate. So at some point, if he was able to take a couple of things together, he'd be able to piece together one concept, let's say that, or what else could, well, I won't show what I was thinking of as well, but there are a couple of choice things that could be quite useful.
Yeah, so that's a great thought, and one of the, when we think about, what it means to feel with our hands, it's actually, it's lots of different sensations all coming together. Our hands are filled with lots of different types of sensors. They're all sensitive to different aspects of touch. And it's sort of all of these things coming together that allows us to, feel the difference between, wood or a piece of metal or, denim or silk, and so we really can't do those things yet. It's something we'd love to start working towards, but it's tough. The symbols and things that you're describing actually bring in a couple of other things, at least one other thing that we're not working on at all, at least with Nathan, and that's this sense of proprioception. So, there's these sort of often two things that we think about in terms of two sort of modalities of sensation that we think about from our, from hands and legs. One is these tactile, these cutaneous things, the things you get when you touch your hand. But we also know where, we know if our fingers are extended or flexed. If your arm, where your hand is, where your arm is in space all the time. We don't, you never forget where your hand is, right? And the reason you don't forget where your hand is because we have all of these sensors in our bodies that contribute to this kinesthetic or proprioceptive sense that we have, and it's this sense of literally where our limbs are in space, where our body is. That's actually processed by a slightly different part of the brain that we can't access very easily with the types of electrodes we use. It's really important for movement. There's a group of people, it's very uncommon, but they lose this sense of proprioception. So they actually can't feel where their limbs are in space. So even though they can move normally, they've got normal muscle control, they can't feel where their limbs are. And so if they close their eyes, they'll fall over because they can't, wow. If they want to walk, they have to literally look at their legs or they have to look at their hands to be able to move their hands. So proprioception is incredibly important in movement, but it's not something we're really looking at here. It's to get there in the brain. It's actually sort of down in one of these folds of the brain that's a little tougher to get to. So right now we're concentrating on these tactile or cutaneous in the sense of touch because there's a good part of the brain that's on the surface of the brain that we can access.
Okay, well, here's my challenge to you, and I'm sure the next time you guys get together, you can try it.
Yeah.
If you had to blindfold Nathan and close his hand, either rock, paper, or scissors, would he be able to determine what you have done? And I actually have a gut feel that he would, because he's taking not only the sensations, but he's also piecing information together as to which fingers are moving, and if they're all closing, logic would tell you that it's probably going to be the rock. So I think that he would actually be able to develop certain exercises like rock, paper, scissors by testing it.
Yeah, we should. We can try that. We've tried something a little similar in terms of like grasping hard objects or soft objects, but they're the same shape. So, but we could certainly look at, I think, shape. Am I grabbing something small or big, or is it the cube or a ball or something like that? And we should try what you're suggesting too.
What about a ball and a cotton wool ball? So when you squeeze it, it has a very different texture.
Yeah.
Does that information also come through?
We would love to be able to do that. There's the number of there's a lot of challenges. One is simply in the robots themselves. In order to be able to do that, you need robots with great sensors that can tell the difference between these things, and that's actually not so easy. So,
but now you did mention that the chip that Nathan has in his head, that's not the brain part. In other words, that's not where all the thinking takes place from the robotics point of view. That's just a sensor.
That's right.
The real thinking takes place in the computer that is outside of his head.
Right.
And if you could develop better algorithms and better programs and more sensitive robotic hand, could you then get better results?
I hope so. We're working on that.
So I'm sure Nathan is quite keen to motivate you, because he has this lifelong dream of being an anime artist,
yeah.
and the only thing that's standing in his way of becoming a famous anime artist is the speed at which your team develops this new technology.
Yeah, and I've never been good at drawing.
That too. And I mean, what I find
I'll be a gamer.
amazing.
I'll be a pro gamer.
Oh, you'll be a pro, and it's a respectful job. I mean, a lot of people, they have the respectable job of testing out EA games, and they get paid to do that. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. But you're not into the EA games. You're more into the Final Fantasies and all the other. What about first game, the shooting games? Because if you could control more than just a finger moving, if you could also think to fire bullets at the same time, that would be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, they're on the list. Halo. I'll play some Halo.
I love it. So now, are you driven by the things that Nathan wants to do in terms of, well, that's not a bad idea, let's see if we can try and develop that? Or do you say, well, Nathan, this is what we'd like to do now? And Nathan goes, that's great, but, Halo, Final Fantasy, I was thinking maybe we could negotiate a bit. How does that process work?
Yeah, well, we have, there's lots of things that we want to know the answers to, and so that is part of it. But we do talk about it. We do ask, before we even started, I think before we even did the implant, we asked Nathan, what would you like to be able to do? I think Nathan's answer to that question maybe has been in development.
For a while, I was saying cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not.
So that's and that's one of these areas where Nathan's definition of cool stuff and my definition of cool stuff may not entirely overlap.
Wow. So now,
I said I want to paint a picture and sell it to the museum for a lot of money. There's lots of local museums, and
I think that
I've had some bad ideas.
Very possible. It's very possible. What is interesting though is that we did a little project with some students here in Cape Town where we made a CNC machine. So if you could imagine, you have a Perspex surface, you have 4 metal bars, and you have a little device that either move with strings attached. So then this little device moves left and right, up and down, and you can program it to draw pictures or write words. Now, technically, it's only 4 things that you're doing, left, right, up, and down. If Nathan could have his hand hacked to control left, right, up, and down, which he was doing with Pac-Man, there's no reason why he couldn't draw using Etch-a-Sketch approach to art.
Yeah, it's totally doable. We just haven't done it
yet. And you see, this is what I love about chatting to you guys, because you you might find that there might be a whole bunch of university students at your university who are saying, well, you know what, this could be a cool project to really get into. And we get to actually make a difference because it could be a real thing that could help someone, and they get marks for it, and they also get to test their ingenuity. And of course, it's a win for you as well in terms of developing your program even further.
Yeah, no, it's always a mix, right? Of, you know, one of the things that is happening here, right, is this is the first time this whole sensory component has been done, and we want to get as much out of it as we can while everything's working well. And you know, there's just so much to learn. It's actually, you know, we have these long lists of experiments that we want to do, and we're always sort of trying to figure out, you know, what do we have time to do? What should we do? What's the best thing to do next? So yeah, it's more of a limitation on total time that we have to work with, rather than shortages of ideas. But you know, these things that you're talking about, which we might sort of classify as activities of daily living, are really important, and we're motivated by those things. So we try and make sure we have some time at least for those things.
Okay, so now let's take what you're doing one step further. Theoretically, practically we know that Nathan can control certain fingers and hand grasps and movement with thought. We then go and find the part of the brain, because we know it is there, and we put electrodes there, and we can think that we want robotic legs to move for us. So technically, we could put someone in an exoskeleton and they could think to move, and it would take them forward. How far away are we from that?
There are people working on that. There's a couple of companies out there who are building these exoskeletons for people who are paraplegics, who have good upper body function, whose legs don't work, and those systems are actually sort of coming into reality. But they
don't integrate with the brain.
No, not yet.
Those are mechanical or robotic devices where, I don't know if you use body weight or they're just robotic, that if you push a button, you can move forward. But now you could literally use thought to actually propel these things and move them forward.
Yeah, that it is possible to probably do those sorts of things. There was a Brazilian group that tried to do something like that recently. For many of these things, it ends up being sort of technical, robotic. These miniaturization issues, trying to make sure that we don't have these cables sticking out of the head. Those practical issues are as much a barrier as anything else. Controlling, being able to control that idea of moving forward, with the legs, at some point should be absolutely extractable from the brain.
Well, now let's talk about thinking outside of the box. Literally, why do you have to be plugged into the brain? You told me you've got these lovely devices that can measure all the activity inside the brain. Why can't we read it from the outside?
I don't know, Nathan, maybe you should take that one. And what are the differences between the two approaches?
Well, MEG is equipment that's the size of a room.
Okay.
So, and you have to get vaulted in. It has like a vault door, and you can't be magnets and stuff. It's not comfortable. So, like the robot arm wouldn't even be able to go in the room. And then what? I guess MEG would be the next step down from actual brain implants. And then EEG would be probably down from that, right, Rob?
Yeah, in terms of, EEG and MEG are maybe similar in some respects. MEG, you have better spatial resolution on. So clearly, at some point, not having to implant anything at all would be the best, right? But on the flip side, I mean, if you've ever seen anybody wearing an EEG cap, right? So this is a way that people, try to measure activity in the brain without actually implanting any devices. Those things look a little, they take a long time to put on. They look a little silly. I think ultimately what you'd want is, an invisible system, right? And at least right now, that's one of the benefits of having these fully implantable systems is, you wouldn't even know that you have one. And at least right now, there's really no, if you want to listen to the activity of individual neurons, you have to go right to them. And there's just there's just a night and day difference between the quality of the signals that you get, from out here versus going right down into the brain. And so it's just, it's a night and day difference what you get.
Well, you say that, but in the old days, you would use a modem to connect to the internet and it would go beep, 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 beep. And you'd think, well, this is the way of the future. And then all of a sudden they put fiber optics and now you can do it all wirelessly. You don't have to put any wires in. I mean, at some point, if the goal is to be able to measure the electrical activity in certain parts of the brain, I'm sure that they would be able to develop something that would meet the needs of your particular field.
Yeah, who knows what's possible, right? At least, with the physics that we understand now, it's going to be very, very difficult. When we're listening to these things, these electrodes that we have implanted in the brain listen to the activity of individual neurons. So we're listening to, we can record the activity of a single neuron as it does something. As soon as you get more than a couple of 100 microns, like if you get the thickness of a human hair away from that, you can't do that anymore.
Wow.
And so you have to be so close to these things to listen to them. If you even go up to the surface of the brain, so even if you still do a surgery, you expose the brain and you put an electrode on the surface of the brain, you're a millimeter or so away from many of these neurons that you'd like to listen to. And you're now back at the point of recording sort of the mass activity from thousands or tens of thousands of neurons. And while you can definitely do some very useful things there, so far, the best control anybody has ever achieved has been by doing the types of things that we're doing now, where you're listening to lots of individual neurons. But who knows what will be possible.
What are Nathan's neurons actually saying? It sounds like a title of a great kids' movies. Nathan's neurons. What are his neurons actually telling you?
Yeah, so we haven't actually really talked about this, and so this is work that goes back a long way, and is really the work of a number of colleagues of mine here at the University of Pittsburgh, and many others. And so I work in a large team of people that are all there's a dozen people that are all kind of working on this project to bring it together. But some time ago, a guy here at the university, Andy Schwartz, along with one of his mentors, figured out that a lot of neurons, at least in this motor part of the brain, in the motor cortex, seem to be really responsive to or tell you a lot of information about the velocity of arm movements. So they tell you things, there's certain neurons that become really active. They fire a lot when you're moving up, right? And they don't fire at all when you're going down, and they fire kind of in between when you move left or right. And so they're sort of telling you about the direction of movement. And so that's kind of the way we often think about these neurons. And it's not the complete story, but it's been a very powerful way to think about what the motor part of the brain is doing. Is it is telling you sort of the direction that you want to move the arm. And if you listen to a couple of hundred of them, you have enough information to tell, all of these directions as well as sort of the directions of the wrist. So that we think about this sort of velocity of movement, or endpoint velocity, as being the signal that's going on in the motor cortex.
So then you could write software that could read what the neurons are thinking and translate that and then obviously that will give you the movement that you require.
And that's exactly how we control the arm now, right? We listen to these neurons, we listen to what they're saying about the velocity of movement, and that's how Nathan actually controls the arm, because we believe that we are at least decoding something of what the brain is doing naturally. And so, Nathan could tell you what it feels like or what he's thinking about when he moves the arm, but I think it feels pretty natural. He's not imagining something complicated. He just, I don't know, Nathan, you want to say anything about that?
Just think like I'm moving an arm. So
That's it. But I mean, we don't normally think about moving an arm.
Simple.
We just move the arm. So when you say you're thinking about moving an arm, I mean, you actually going, right, arm, you're now going to, I mean, you're actually now being far more conscious of moving your arm.
no, it's still thinking as much as you would moving your arm. It just happens to not be attached to me.
Wow. That is very, very cool. But now, of course, being so cool and having the matrix attached to your head and having Rob being able to listen to all your neurons, you got to meet someone quite special recently. You were invited to the White House for their science expo, and they had some great speakers there, and you got to meet President Obama. So how was that meeting?
It was actually on university campus, not at the White House.
But, was it at which campus was it?
We were on CMU on that side.
It was actually at the University of Pittsburgh.
Oh, was it? That's very cool.
Yeah, it was a joint thing. It was the White House Frontiers Conference.
Mm-hmm.
That it was University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. There was a ton of speakers and stuff, and yeah. So I met the president, and it was pretty cool.
I mean, it sounded more like it was the other way around. The president was like, no, I actually met Nathan, and he was pretty cool. He was able to fist pump. I mean, you gave him a fist bump, and I think that he understood the nature of that particular meeting more so than any other incumbents that might be taking office quite soon. And I think that it's amazing that he gets the science and technology. I mean, he realized the gravity of it.
Yeah, that was one thing that was pretty cool. I mean, we were all standing around waiting for him to come and getting all fidgety and nervous, but then he came over and he started talking, and it was really nice that he was there because of the science. He wasn't just, some guy told him to go to this thing and shake this robot hand and and then go home or whatever. He actually knew what was going on, which was pretty cool.
That is very cool. And when you say you were fidgeting and waiting, how do you think fidgeting, and then all of a sudden the robotic arm starts fidgeting? I mean, what happens there?
No, at that point they had they paused the arm if I'm not trying to do anything. So I was just actually fidgeting.
And for you, Robert, how was that experience?
Oh, it was pretty cool. Like Nathan said, it was really, we'd sent lots of information forward, ahead of time for him, but, he'd clearly, read it and thought about it and knew exactly what was going on. He didn't come up and say, hey, tell me what you're doing. He knew what was going on, and he was, I think he was excited to be, as excited as we were to meet him. I think he was excited to be there and see what Nathan was doing.
That is very, very cool. So now we've only got a couple of minutes left. I know Mr. McNulty, his class, they've watched a couple of video clips about you guys, and they've been listening for the last part of the interview. Do you guys want to ask any questions?
We might. Let me see.
Oh, okay, all right. You're just going to check with them to see if they have any questions?
Like, how do the brain receptors pick up what movements the brain wants to make the arm do?
Did you get that question? How do the brain receptors actually know which movements to make?
Nathan, do you want to take that one?
I don't know. You might be able to explain
Sure.
training better.
So, I mentioned earlier that we know enough information about what goes on in the brain now that these, there's 10 billion neurons in your brain, but there's these group of neurons that actually control or are heavily involved in controlling movement. And what those neurons do is they actually sound like little pops. They go tick, 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 tick. And when they're firing faster, if they go like that, they're really active. And some neurons become really active when you're moving up. And some neurons become really active when you move that way. Some neurons become really active when you open your hand. And so if we listen to enough of these neurons, we can basically piece together the message that they're saying. And so we've got a way to train the system to listen to these. And so, Nathan just watches a video of a robot arm moving, and he imagines doing the same thing. And after we've been doing that for a few minutes, we learn the code, we learn the pattern of the neurons, and then Nathan thinks the same thing. So now those neurons that were firing a lot, going like that when you move the arm, when he was imagining moving the arm up, we know then if that neuron becomes active, we move the arm up. Does that answer your question?
Amazing. Thank you.
Awesome. So I mean, I can see a couple of hands up. So I don't want them to miss out on the opportunity. So let's give them a chance.
Yeah.
We have one more question. This is Shiv.
Okay.
What type of latency is there between the signal between the brain and the hand, and how if it's wireless, how do you deal with many different wireless signals in the same area?
Yeah, I was listening earlier, and I got to play back the whole thing for him because I know you kind of answered some of these questions. But how do you deal with the latency between the signal in the brain and the movement in the hand?
So we can actually do it pretty fast. So we can move information, we can process information in sort of 10 milliseconds. So there's virtually no latency in terms of our ability to listen to what's going on in the brain and then send commands to the robot. We can do that as fast as you can do it. So we really don't have any significant latencies. In fact, we might even be able to do it a little faster than you can do it with your own nervous system. But in terms of the wireless, we would love to have a wireless connection, but we don't right now. The question you ask about how would you deal with wireless interference, that's a great question, and it's, I think, unclear. There are certain medical devices that are implanted right now, pacemakers, defibrillators, and other things like that actually use wireless interfaces, and there's a lot of people thinking about how to do that safely, how to do that securely, how do you make sure that somebody couldn't hack into that system, and you can imagine what could happen if somebody could, remotely trigger your implantable defibrillator. Right? That'd be bad news. So, there's medical device companies are thinking about how to do this stuff securely and safely, and it's something we just don't worry about right now because we don't have a wireless interface.
I mean, if you had a wireless interface in Nathan's head and someone hacked it, he'd be a pretty good dancer. They could have a lot of fun. So now the thing is, I mean, we've actually run out of time, but I needed to ask you one more thing. What sort of research are you doing now? What is the next step? Because obviously, I think the novelty of the fact that you can now communicate backwards and forwards, Nathan's already taken that step, and now you're wondering what next. So can you give us any indication of, without spilling in too many beans, in terms of what it is that you're going to be doing?
Yeah, Nathan, do you want to answer that? I'll carry up if there's anything left over. But you know as well as I do what our plans are.
Oh, so not very well.
So Yeah, you know, really what we're trying to do now is see if you can control movement better, right? So if you reach out to pick up a water bottle with the arm, can you hold it the right way? Can you hold it without dropping it? Can you hold it without crushing it? You know, there's all these things that if you don't have sensation from your own hands, it's really difficult to move. I mean, lots of you may, you know, you've been to the dentist before, or maybe had, you know, get a filling and you get an injection to freeze your, you know, to get some freezing done. And, you know, at least when I do that, you know, my lips go all numb and I can hardly talk. And so without being able to feel, it's really hard to move, actually. And so imagine picking up an object, or, you know, buttoning buttons on a shirt or something like that, if you couldn't feel anything from your own hands. So what we're working on now really is trying to show that now that we can provide some sensation, can Nathan actually control the arm better than he could before and do tasks and manipulate objects in ways that he couldn't before. So that's a hard problem.
that is. I mean, could you not train his brain by doing mental exercises to actually get him to sense better?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. That's another thing that we've been talking about. Can we change what he feels by manipulating the way that we provide the sensation? I don't know the answer to that. So there's, you know, this is one of the fun things about research. It's one of the great things about science, right? Is that every question you answer opens up, you know, a whole new range of questions. And so we're, you know, when we have meetings and things like that, we're always talking about new ideas, things we want to try. And the challenge more than anything is, you know, finding the time, you know, figuring out which one's the best one to try and finding enough time to do that, because we've got pages of ideas of things we want to try, and only so much time.
Rob, I have to ask you this. Is Nathan, because he's such a celebrity now, is he a bit of a diva? Does he, like, for example, ask for certain riders? Does he have to have his own trailer? You know, that type of thing before he comes in and jumps through all the hoops and the things that you make him do?
He's pretty good to work with. You know, he brings in, he gets these snack boxes from Japan with all these weird treats in them sometimes. And so he actually feeds us more than I think we feed him. But I don't know. He hasn't asked us to start providing that stuff yet.
But do you speak Japanese, Nathan?
No.
Not yet. But you are a lover of the Japanese culture and especially anime.
Yeah.
So what is your dream with regards to anime in the future?
Watch a lot of it. Really, I hope one day I can go to Japan.
But now you've got a GoFundMe page for something. What is that all about?
A new wheelchair van. Mine's pretty run down. And with making the trip to Pittsburgh a couple days a week, I really need a new one. And they're not cheap. So
okay, so we will put all your GoFundMe details on the YouTube page, and we will obviously try and punt it as much as we can, because hopefully the fact that you're actually going to Pittsburgh on a regular basis means that you are contributing towards the research, and that's going to help other people in the future. So when people make a contribution to your wheelchair, they're actually helping other people in the long term. You like my logic there? It's working?
Yeah, it's totally right.
It makes sense.
It certainly makes sense to me. So guys, I just wanted to say thank you very much, firstly, to Rob for giving up of your time. I know that you've got very precious little time, and you actually made time for us, especially, you know, all the negotiations just before Thanksgiving and then after Thanksgiving. So we really do appreciate the energy and enthusiasm that you are willing to share the science with as many people that are willing to listen. And of course, to Nathan, our mystery guest who arrived, we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And is it Arvind Suresh or Suresh Arvind? Because, you know, some people like to switch their last name and first name. So I'm assuming it's Arvind.
This is Arvind, the Arvind Suresh.
That's Arvind, not Suresh. So I'm calling you Suresh, and you're going,
That's
yes,
fine.
that's me. You were so
That's fine.
polite.
That's fine.
So Arvind, thank you so much. And of course, Mr.
Appreciate it.
McNulty
Thank you.
there in Newtown, and we've got Govinda in Nepal, and we had Maria, and we had Sebastian, and we had a whole bunch of people watching it live as well. And of course, now it will still be available on livingmaths.com. So we'll just share it with everyone who are keen to learn more about the robotics of the brain and the future of building RoboCops. And no, I'm just kidding. We're not really building RoboCops, but I know that that's something that Nathan would be excited about. Thank you so much for all of your energy and for breaking it down in simple terms, because I think that when it comes to democratizing science, we want to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And you being able to explain all these concepts and Nathan to give his insight as well, it really does make a big difference. So I'm going to stop the broadcast over here.